Good morning. It is now time, and we would like to begin the press conference. The OECD is launching its 2024 economic survey on Japan today. Every 2 years, the OECD surveys the economic conditions of member countries and publishes a report containing the results of its analysis and recommendations. This is like a physical checkup of member countries of sorts. The latest economic survey on Japan was published in December 2021. Today, we have invited Mr. Mathias CORMANN, Secretary General of OECD, to give us a briefing on the report. Secretary General CORMANN, testing, is this coming through? Testing. Is the interpretation coming through? Let me give you the profile of Secretary General CORMANN. He's originally from Belgium, very close to the German border. That is where he was born. And in 1996, he emigrated to Australia. So he has both a European and an Indo-Pacific background, which is quite unique. He has served as Australian Federal Senator and as Australian Minister of Finance, and in June 2021, he became the 6th Secretary General of the OECD. Well, at this Japan National Press Club in 2021, when the previous survey was published, he gave a press conference, but he joined us remotely from Paris because of COVID restrictions. So this will be his first in-person press conference in Japan. So as Secretary General of OECD, this is the 30th press conference given by the OECD at JNPC. Thank you so very much for your participation in this press conference. There will be simultaneous interpretation between English and Japanese. So if you require such services, please use the receivers. After Secretary General CORMANN makes his initial remarks, we will take questions from the members of the press joining us here physically or online. For the Q&A, he will be joined by Dr. Vincent Cohen, Head of Country Studies 3 Division, OECD Economics Department, and Dr. Muge Adelet Maguan, the Senior Economist, to take the questions. Let me introduce myself. I'm Mikio SUGENO, JNPC Planning Committee member and Senior Editorial Writer and Senior Staff Writer of Nikkei. The interpreters are Ms. Yuri YOSHIKUNI and Ms. Naoko Watanabe from Simul International. Handing over to you. The floor is yours, Secretary General.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be back in Tokyo, and it's great to be here to present the 2024 OECD Economic Survey of Japan. And this is a very important year in the Japan-OECD relationship, because this year is when we mark the 60th anniversary of Japan's membership of the OECD, and it's also a special year because this year Japan will be presiding over our Ministerial Council meeting, which will take place on the 2nd and 3rd of May. So good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today for the launch of this OECD economic survey. And I get straight into it. As you can see, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, Japan at that stage was pursuing a broad structural reform agenda to tackle deflation, boost growth, and respond to the economic impact of population aging. And these reforms were having a positive impact, in particular with growing labor market participation among women and older workers, and also very much supporting Japan's economic recovery from the pandemic. However, as a result of slower global growth and also the energy market disruptions around the world that were caused by Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, growth has slowed to 2.9% in 2022. And while GDP in Japan grew strongly in the first half of 2023, it has since lost some momentum due to comparatively weak private consumption and investment. Inflation remains above the 2% target. Indeed, headline inflation in Japan hit levels not seen in 4 decades, peaking at 4.3% in January 2023 and coming down to 2.8% in November last year. In parallel, inflation has also become more broad-based, with core inflation, that is inflation excluding energy and food, also at 2.8% in November last year. So after decades of very low inflation or even deflation, we see this as a turning point for Japan. Rising energy and food prices have spread throughout the economy, bringing inflation back into target range and resulting in demands for higher wages, which support further inflation. Wage growth will be a key determinant of the inflation trajectory moving forward. Labour markets in Japan remain very tight, with unemployment very low at 2.6% in 2022 and 2023. So wage growth is expected to continue throughout 2024, reflecting strong outcomes from the latest annual wage negotiations. In fact, the wage increase of 3.6% agreed for larger companies influences wages for employers countrywide and is expected to quickly spread to small and medium-sized firms. We project GDP to grow by 1% in 2024 and 1.1% in 2025, down from 1.9% last year, with domestic demand as the main driver of that growth. Inflation is projected to decline over the course of this year, but pressures from increasing wages will keep it close to the 2% target until 2025. And with inflation remaining at or above a target, we certainly believe that monetary policy can gradually and modestly start tightening. We highlight 4 policy priorities to strengthen the resilience of the Japanese economy going forward. First, improving fiscal sustainability, important in many OECD countries, but in particular for Japan, to prepare for future spending pressures and also to increase resilience towards any future shocks. Given the comparatively high public debt starting position in Japan prior to the pandemic, the necessary and important measures to support households and business in response to the pandemic, followed by the fiscal impact also of the energy shock, have pushed gross public debt to 245% of GDP in 2022, which is up from an already very high 224% in 2019. Aging costs are set to rise, and debt service risks due to a possible rise in long-term interest rates have, of course, increased. So a key priority is to implement a credible medium-term fiscal consolidation path to put public debt levels on a sustainable downward trend and to boost the credibility of Japan's debt servicing capacity. Just by way of example, efficiency gains in health and long-term care spending would help enhance fiscal sustainability and help respond to the fiscal impact of an aging population. I mean, as you can see here, Japan is a marked outlier when it comes to length of hospital stays. Patients in Japan stay 3 times as long in hospitals as the average across the OECD, with the number of long-term care beds in hospitals 2.5 times the OECD average. And using hospitals for long-term care costs is more expensive than to provide beds in specialized long-term care facilities. In fact, it is more than twice as expensive as providing beds in specialized long-term care facilities. So there is opportunity here to move long-term care away from hospitals, prioritizing home-based care and assigning only those with severe needs to institutional care, which would be both more cost-effective and hence have a fiscal dividend, but also would have a quality of life dividends as well. Boosting government revenues should be another element of a broader fiscal reform package. Japanese tax revenues at 33.2% of GDP overall in 2021 are around the OECD average of 34.1%, slightly below, but broadly in line. But the consumption tax rate of 10% is among the lowest across the OECD. Gradually rising consumption taxes in small increments could help ensure that new planned expenditures do not lead to a further rise in public debt. More predictable budgeting will also be important. Japan enacted 18 supplementary budgets since 2012, including 7 since the pandemic, which lowers the predictability and the significance of annual budgets. The use of supplementary budgets should be limited to large macroeconomic shocks and followed by a mandatory evaluation, for example, by an independent fiscal institution. Second, there is a need to boost productivity growth. Reviving productivity growth is indeed key to rising growth and addressing demographic challenges by fostering innovation and making better use of the shrinking workforce. Japan's investment into research and development at 3.3% of GDP in 2021 is one of the highest across the OECD. However, only 6% of that investment into research and development was linked to investments from small and medium-sized enterprises, which is significantly lower than the OECD average of 40%. Enhancing public support for investment into research and development can help boost incentives for smaller firms to invest and lower the productivity gap between smaller and larger firms. Business dynamism could also be enhanced. The rate of firm creation and growth is relatively modest in Japan. One factor is generous and not very well targeted public support for small and medium-sized enterprises, which prevents the exit of unproductive firms. Government guarantees for loans have surged further with the pandemic. Outstanding loan guarantees for small and medium-sized companies amount to 41 trillion yen, which is about 7.3% of GDP in fiscal year 2022, compared to 21 trillion yen, 3.7% of GDP just 3 years earlier. So that is a near doubling in a 3-year period of outstanding loan guarantees. So the third challenge that we focus on is to address the demographic headwinds. The Japanese society continues to age. The old age dependency ratio, the ratio of the population older than 65 years of age to the population between 20 and 65 years of age, is projected to reach 79% by 2050, up from 54% in 2022. Japan's fertility rate reached a record low of just under 1.3% in 2022, the fourth lowest among OECD countries. So Prime Minister Kishida's priority of reversing the decline in fertility rates by removing obstacles to having children is certainly an important and welcome step. But we do believe that a comprehensive approach is needed to tackle aging pressures. Policies to support families and children will be essential to help reverse the decline in the fertility rate. Only 17% of eligible men took parental leave in 2022, compared to 80% of women. More than half of men using parental leave took less than 2 weeks, reflecting concerns over reduced earnings during leave and negative effects on their career, along with the limited ability of small and medium-sized enterprises to organize replacements during their absence. Raising the benefit for all parents and requiring firms to disclose a percentage of their eligible employees who take parental leave could help to limit financial concerns and raise awareness among employees. Keeping workers employed for longer is also key to counter the shrinking labor force. Japan's mandatory retirement regime, which allows firms to determine their workers' retirement age, discourages the employment of older workers. As of 2022, 70% of firms set a mandatory retirement age of 60, which is 5 years earlier than the official pension eligibility age of 65. Abolishing the right of firms to set mandatory retirement would increase employment and weaken the role of seniority in setting wages. Raising the pension eligibility age beyond the target of 65 in line with expected increases in life expectancy would help strengthen work incentives. Barriers between regular and non-standard jobs will also need to be removed, we believe. The percentage of women who are non-regular workers has risen sharply to 55% over the past 30 years. Such jobs can lower career prospects, delay family formation, and weaken female labour force participation. Relaxing strict employment protection would help non-standard workers to transition more easily into regular jobs. Policies should also ensure that Japan is an attractive destination for foreign workers. Japan ranked relatively low in 2023 when it comes to the quality of opportunities available to potential highly educated immigrant workers, with the 8th weakest score among all OECD countries, according to the OECD Indicators of Talent Attractiveness, which measures the strengths and weaknesses of OECD countries in their capacity to attract and retain migrants. And that is at a time when Japan, arguably, in order to maintain workforce participation levels and attract the skills it needs to maintain growth momentum, perhaps needs foreign workers more than others. Offering long-term residency to workers and their families, improving access to education, and preventing discrimination would make Japan more competitive in attracting highly skilled foreign workers. And fourth, addressing environmental challenges. Climate change is a key challenge given Japan's geographic position in a region with increasing typhoon intensity. Addressing its causes and consequences will help enhance long-term sustainability and resilience to shocks. An innovation-driven economy can spur the green transition and support climate change adaptation by developing innovative solutions to protect against risks while supporting the transition to carbon neutrality. To meet Japan's climate objectives, ambitious reforms are required to durably lower emissions, given Japan's heavy reliance on fossil fuels. The government's plans to use a mix of green investment, innovation and carbon pricing to meet those targets are welcome. Stepping up efforts to boost the current modest contribution of renewables to electricity supply will be important. Indeed, enhancing the electricity grid through better integration of the fragmented regional networks to allow for a better transmission countrywide would help Japan meet climate objectives while also increasing energy security. So with that, thank you for the opportunity to present our findings, and together with Vincent and Müge from the Country Studies branch in the Economics Department of the OECD, we would be very happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could the moderator please turn his microphone on? The interpreter has difficulty hearing. The moderator does not have his microphone on. Sorry. At 10:45, Secretary General CORMANN has to leave, so we have very limited time. So I'd appreciate it if you could keep your questions short. On the reduction of national tax.
Income tax cut taken by the Kishida government. The Japanese government introduced is introducing the income tax cut, one of measure, but the public opinion is not appear to not to support that one. And you in your report you pointed out this kind of main support measures have been sizable and predominantly untargeted. That's a kind of problem. Do you think that this measure can create a virtuous cycle between price and wage increase? And what is essential to create this circumstance on this kind of virtuous cycle? Thank you.
Well, I will ask Vincent to add to this, but the first point, I mean, when it comes to the overall tax as a share of GDP ratio, as I mentioned in my presentation, Japan is broadly in line with the OECD average, though, I mean, I guess like what is always important also is to look at the tax mix and to ensure that the tax mix is as growth friendly as possible, because that in itself helps to boost revenue growth moving forward. So to the extent that a change in tax policy settings helps to facilitate a stronger growth and hence also stronger revenue growth, I mean, that helps with strengthening the fiscal position. But we also believe that in Japan there is quite a lot of scope on the expenditure side of the budget, and I pointed to one example there where there is opportunity to ensure that the public expenditure can more efficiently deliver the outcomes sought. Now, overall, I mean, it is a very high priority for Japan to put itself on a credible medium-term trajectory to reduce its public debt position. I mean, that is not a not a new revelation. I mean, that is something that we've said for some time, but it is a need that is becoming more and more urgent and more acute. And so we certainly say that there is a need to both on the expenditure and on the revenue side of the budget to look at those opportunities. Now, when it comes to inflation, I mean, we do see that there is a level of momentum now in terms of wages growth, and we do believe that there is opportunity there for the sort of virtuous cycle that you mentioned, and that is certainly what we expect to see from here, and that will help underpin domestic consumption as well. Vincent, I'm just wondering whether you want to add to this.
Well, maybe one of the key messages in the survey is that support should be targeted as much as possible, given the limited fiscal space that Japan enjoys, and the risk that we highlight that long-term interest rates would rise at some point in the future, thereby increasing the weight of debt service, which has been remarkably low so far, despite the high level of the debt ratio. So we recommend in the survey that the support that's still in place to cope with the energy price shock be more targeted and phased out ultimately by 2025. This should also help Japan meet its ambition to go back to a primary surplus in the coming years.
ありがとうございました。それでは皆さんから。
Thank you. We would now like to take questions from the floor. If you have a question, please raise your hand and I will call upon you. Please state your name and affiliation before asking your question. And if you would like to ask questions from those people online, please give us your text question. There's a Q&A box. Please write in your name and affiliation and write your question. The questions can be asked either in Japanese or in English. Yes, go ahead. My name is Kodama, President of Foreign Press Center. Formerly, I was ambassador to the OECD, but I'm here as a media person. One question. Thank you for a crisp and clear recommendations for Japan. Japan is facing deflation or exit strategy for deflation. How that can be implemented is one of the biggest challenges Japan faces. Governor Ueda of the BOJ is working on this. This year, this is likely to be a challenging year, and the market showed many reactions. So my question is that yield curve control probably is going to be phased out for sure. And in addition, negative interest rate could be raised to zero level, but beyond that, because of different conditions, we need to wait and see. That is the broad view held here in Japan. But I would like to ask you, the peer review message, to play the role of peer review, OECD and the Secretary General and the economists, please let us know your views about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, I agree with your assessment of the view in Japan and with your assessment of the view of the Bank of Japan, and I think it is true to say that the Bank of Japan is being very prudent in its assessments and its decisions. And I guess in the context of several decades of very low inflation or deflation, I understand why the Bank of Japan is very keen to ensure that it has all of the data it feels is necessary to make judgments in relation to a further tightening of a level of tightening of monetary policy moving forward. From where we sit, we are perhaps more optimistic that inflation will more durably settle at about 2%, and we do see that there is scope to consequently consider a level of tightening in monetary policy in Japan, but we also understand that the Bank of Japan will take a prudent approach to these decisions.
はい、ありがとうございます。じゃあ次の質問をお受けします。どうぞ。
Next question, please.
I'm Leiko Sakurada from Mujeji Press. I have two simple questions. The first one is about inflation and the real wages. As you reported, the inflation has risen about the target of 2%, but the real wages are falling. How do you evaluate the measures taken by Japanese government to tackle the impact of high price, especially cash handouts to lower income households? Do you see the future of Japan where the real wages overturn inflation? And my next question is about the consumption tax. The current rate, 10%, is actually among the lowest in the OECD countries. Do you think Japanese government should raise this rate? If so, when and to what level? Don't you think that high tax would decrease the real wage growth? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So firstly, I mean, there has been some increase in nominal wages growth, though you're right. I mean, in the context of higher inflation in more recent times compared to what Japan experienced over the previous several decades, real wages have not, of course, grown as yet, though we do see wages growth momentum, or wage growth gaining momentum into 2024 and 2025. That is certainly our working assumptions. And the latest economic package also includes support for businesses to raise wages, which we believe will have an impact. Now, in relation to consumption taxes, I mean, what we are suggesting is a incremental and gradual increase. So that is certainly our recommendation. I mean, in the end, there are three ways that you can tackle your public debt challenge: lower expenditure, increase your revenue, or on the back of higher taxes, or increase your revenue on the back of stronger growth. You probably need a combination of all three. And what we say is that, in relation to revenue measures, consumption taxes is an obvious area where the government could focus. The key would be to do it very gradually and to announce well into advance what is coming, so that there is certainty and capacity to adjust over time. But Vincent, on those two questions.
Sure. Well, on wages, if we look at the Shunto last year, the outcome was quite encouraging. And if we look at the statements by Keidan Ren and Rengo and the government going forward for the forthcoming Shunto, real wages should pick up after indeed a period of decline due to the price shock. We are looking at nominal wages rising somewhere between 3% and 5% or so, and inflation in the low 2s. So in real terms, there will be an increase going forward. I think that's important. On where should the consumption tax rate go? Well, towards the OECD average, and as Secretary General CORMANN underlined, gradually and predictably, so that we don't see what we have seen in earlier cases of consumption tax hikes, a dramatic reaction of consumers when the hike takes place, with a lot of intertemporal substitution. So if we do manage to set up a framework where over time, bit by bit, the rate increases. This would be a fair way and an efficient way to bring in tax revenue to finance the spending pressures that are coming from a rapidly aging population. Even if we deal with healthcare spending efficiency, as we underline in the survey, there will still be a lot of pressures to cope with the costs of aging. So we need to find some revenue to fund that.
はい、ありがとうございました。じゃあ他の質問をね。
Thank you. Let us go to the next question. The person in the back.
NHK の安井と申します。
My name is Yasui from NHK. Fiscal sustainability. One of the recommendations says that support measures to energy shocks should be phased down and should be more targeted. Now the Japanese government is still not able to do that. This could be regarded as a challenge. And going forward, how can you make it targeted? And by when should this be phased down? If you have any specific recommendations, please let us know.
The only government in the world that is facing the political challenge that is involved with better targeting fiscal support. But it is something that has to be done. Fiscal support that is too broad-based when it comes to help cushion the impact of higher energy prices. It's expensive. It also creates distortions in the market that are undesirable, including when it comes to meeting climate objectives. And prices have come off from their peaks, and so we understand the political challenges involved in taking away support from groups that have become used to them. But we do think that it is something that should already have happened here and all around the world. But it's, I guess, comparatively easy for us to say, but we say it nevertheless. It's harder to politically implement, and we understand that, but we would certainly very strongly encourage the government in Japan, as we do with governments all around the world, to take those steps.
ありがとうございます。じゃあ
Thank you. Next question, please. Kurama, Yomiuri Shimbun. As you mentioned at the outset, after the pandemic, enormous fiscal spending has taken place. And domestically, there was fear that a government bonds rating would go down. How do you look at the JGBs in Japan?
First point I would make before I let Vincent comment on bonds in Japan. The fiscal support in response to the pandemic, was necessary and important. The support that went to households and businesses and to support the economy helped to avoid, what would otherwise have been a very, very difficult situation on the other side. And I think that governments around the world and the government here in Japan responded very well, and both fiscal and monetary policy responded very, very well. And but now we have to deal with some of the aftermath, and that is also one of the reasons why we say it's important to rebuild fiscal buffers and to put the country back on a fiscally sustainable path for the future. But in relation to bonds specifically.
Yes, a large share of the JGBs are actually held on the balance sheet of the Bank of Japan, which is one of the challenges they face when contemplating the exit from non-conventional monetary policy. I think what is important is that a credible medium-term fiscal framework with specific measures be put in place so as to support the credibility of fiscal policy, in which case that will facilitate the exit from unconventional monetary policy and QE. So, so far, so good. I think that there's no angst in the markets that overnight the JGB yields will surge. But it is important to continue to nurture this confidence in the market by taking steps to reinforce fiscal sustainability.
はい、ありがとうございます。他に質問をお願いいたします。あ、どうぞ。
Next question, please.
すみません、日本経済。
My name is Hirose from Nikkei. Now, prices, outlook of prices. Earlier, you said that the cautious stance of the BOJ is understandable, that you are looking at this optimistically. But if you look at this report, outlook of prices, there are high levels of uncertainty. Such strong wording is being used. Now, there are uncertainties in world economy and Japan's labor practices and fiscal issues. Prices. What is the feasibility of putting an end to deflation, and what are the uncertainties about prices?
As I've mentioned, I mean, our expectation is that inflation will settle around 2%. And I mean, OECD projections of sustained inflation around 2% with increasing wages growth and a closing of the output gap, in our mind, implies that a gradual exit from the negative interest rate policy is warranted in early 2024, and we certainly recommend to gradually start increasing policy rates as we're confident to see inflation settling durably close to the target of 2%. But you know, as I've also said, I mean, I do understand that the Bank of Japan is taking a more prudent approach and wants to continue to monitor ongoing price developments for a bit longer, and I mean that is their job. But you know, I guess we asked for our perspective on it, and I understand the historical context when it comes to inflation and deflation in Japan, and I understand the desire of the Bank of Japan to avoid premature tightening and to prefer waiting for more data to come through in order to, I guess, avoid overshooting, you know, but by the same token, you know, I guess we are making our assessment, and our assessment is slightly more optimistic, I guess, when it comes to what we expect to happen to inflation in Japan moving forward.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. Other questions? Then, if I may raise a question. This year, in May, I understand there'll be an MCM of the OECD. Now, Japan will have the presidency, and it's also the 60th anniversary. Secretary General CORMANN last year at the G7 summit, and on various occasions you have been to Japan. So what are your expectations and hopes for Japan? I'd like to sound out your thinking on this.
Very much. Well, this MCM is going to be very important to help shape the global agenda on a range of global policy developments, ranging from ensuring more resilient global supply chains to promoting a rules-based global trading system in good working order, to tackling climate change in a way that is globally more coherent and better coordinated, to also making sure that when it comes to artificial intelligence and the digital transformation, we have the right policy settings in place to ensure we can seize all of the benefits of AI and seize all of the benefits of the digital transformation, while also better managing some of the risks and disruptions associated with it. And in that, we will be building on many of the achievements of the G7 presidency of Japan in 2023, including, of course, the establishment by, under the leadership of Prime Minister Kishida, of the Hiroshima process on artificial intelligence. And one very important aspect of the Ministerial Council meeting this year, we hope, is that we can take some further tangible steps in increasing and strengthening our engagement across the Indo-Pacific, in particular into Southeast Asia. We recently received a request by Indonesia to start the accession process, the OECD accession process with Indonesia, which is a historic request for our organization. Indonesia being the biggest economy of Southeast Asia, a very strongly growing economy and increasingly significant economy at a global level. I mean, the fact that Indonesia has committed itself to a process of aligning with OECD standards and best practices, we believe is good for Indonesia, it's good for OECD member countries, and it's good for the global economy. And we certainly hope that in the context of the MCM presided by Japan this year, that we will be able to take a very significant step forward when it comes to our engagement with countries across Southeast Asia in particular. I mean, these are just some of the items.
ありがとうございます。他に質問ございますか？
Are there any other questions? If not, if I may ask another question. 2024 is an election year in many countries. Multilateral cooperation is important, you mentioned, but in reality, U.S. presidential election and there are other elections, free trade, supply chain issues, AI, generative AI issues. This is going to be a very challenging year for all these topics. What is the role that OECD can play in this world of divisions? How can we avoid those divisions? The importance of OECD, the role it plays, and the challenges that it faces.
OECD is an important international organization bringing together market-based democracies from around the world, and it's about sharing data and information to learn from each other what works, what doesn't work, to facilitate exchange, to provide a platform for multilateral dialogue to help develop solutions to the shared challenges of our time, and we do that based on evidence and data. And we think that is, it's very important that as we seek to tackle the challenges of our time, that we are guided by evidence and data and good public policy. Now, when it comes to elections, we work with the elected governments of the day in our member countries, and we trust the citizens of our member countries to make the right decisions in relation to the leadership of their countries.
Up to voters, but anyway. So, ございました。他に質問ございますか？なければこれで終わりにしようと思いますので、ということで、じゃあコーマン事務総長からお二方どうもありがとうございました。これで終わります。皆さんどうもありがとうございました。